Hello guys, so I'm really annoyed because I've already filmed this video once and the laptop decided to crash whilst I was saving it. So that one was very in detail, it was about 40 minutes. This one is not going to be the same. And the reason well, first of all, the reason is because I don't want to film the whole video again. But secondly, because we've already done this actually. So whilst I was actually explaining it to you in the last video that I filmed, I was thinking they already know this. Whilst I was saying it, I was thinking they already know this. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So this next perspective that we're going to be going through is the psychodynamic perspective, okay? Now, if you turn to your the psychodynamic perspective page in your booklets, it's got a picture of Yoda, Homer Simpson's on it. It's got a picture of a woman being kissed by a little boy, and it's got a picture of Freud on it as well. You will see that the psychodynamic perspective, we've actually done most of it at the beginning of the year when we were doing our course studies. So what I'm going to ask you to do is just listen to me while I tell you about the assumptions. But after that, all of the activities, apart from obviously how the course study links to the perspective and the strengths and weaknesses, you guys will already know based on previous notes in your course studies booklets. Excuse me. So the assumptions of the psychodynamic perspective, you can read through that page, but I'm going to go through it with you as well, is that I've got hiccups. Is that all behaviour happens as the result of our unconscious forces. So psychodynamic perspective psychologists, such as Freud, actually believe that all behaviour happens as a result of unconscious forces. They also believe that early experiences are very important because they shape personality, relationships and adult characteristics. So any experience you have in early life actually shapes personality, relationships and adult characteristics. Again, you can see these assumptions are already in your booklet and there's a little bit more information about them as well. So if you want to pause this after I've gone through the assumptions with you, and you can read through that assumptions page as well. It also says that all behaviour is a result of going through the psychosexual stages of development. I don't know if you remember those, but they're the oral, anal, phallic, latency, genital stages. So all behaviour happens as a result of us going through those stages and as a result of the three parts of the personality, the id, ego and superego. And the mind is split into three: the conscious, pre-conscious and unconscious. Now there are three studies that fall into this in this perspective. Now the perspectives aren't like the approaches. The approaches have two specific studies from first year and two specific studies from second year that fit within them. The perspectives do not. They only have one from first year, and that's Freud. Okay, and then Kohlberg and Hancock, which are the ones in red, are actually from second year, so you don't have to know about those just yet. Okay, so the perspectives are a lot smaller than the approaches, and the perspectives are just like the approaches in that they have assumptions and they have specific studies that link to them and stuff like that. But the perspectives are a lot smaller. So this perspective believes all about the unconscious and the unconscious mind as a driving force for the personality. So what I'd like you to do is, you will see in your booklets, let me just pop up the booklet and I'll show you. You'll see in your booklets to have a read through the assumptions page, and then to actually remind yourself about the three parts of the mind, the conscious, pre-conscious and unconscious, and have a go at this activity here. So task 1, which is the iceberg in the picture, is already divided into conscious, pre-conscious, unconscious. Your task is to place the different behaviours in the relevant part of the mind. So where do you think these behaviours reside in? Is it the conscious mind, unconscious or pre-conscious? And then I want you to have a go at the next activity, which is, again, have a little read through what is the id, ego and superego. Use the PowerPoint to help you out as well. So look at the slides based on id, ego and superego. I'll just go to them quickly and show you. So look at the slides and see if that can actually help you out with filling in the gaps for task 1 for the id, ego and superego. And then we move on to the psychosexual stages of development. Again, this is something you guys have been through. If you need help, you can always use the slides. So let me quickly show you. So if we go down to the psychosexual stages of development, there are the ages on the slides. You can see the ages are there. Oops. And the ages are not in the booklet. You can add in the ages. And then the part of the body is also on the slides. So you can see for the oral stage, it says the fixation of the libido is on the mouth. So the part of the body would be the mouth. The next thing that it says is what are the characteristics of the oral stage. Now you guys should be looking at your notes from your old core studies booklet, okay, to help you out with this table, with filling in this table. We have been through this together, you have written notes on it, we have done a full Freud workbook on it, so I want you to use those notes to fill in this table for the different psychosexual stages. And then the next thing in your booklet we have is the how does a study link with the assumptions of the psychodynamic perspective. Now I have that here for you. Now the only study that we've learnt about in first year is Freud, and how Freud and Freud is the only one that links with the psychodynamic perspective. So I've got your answer right here. One assumption of the psychodynamic perspective is that human behavior is a result of the unconscious mind. Remember, you always have to mention an assumption. So I'm going to pop that in green if I can. How do I do this? So you always have to mention an assumption first. Once you've mentioned the assumption, you've got to tell me how it links. Okay, so how does the study link? So we've got Freud's study links to this because he looks at the unconscious processes of a little boy called Little Hans and his phobia of horses. And then your last thing to do is to give me evidence. Okay, that's some sort of result. So I've got here, for example, Freud found that his phobia had derived from Little Hans's unconscious processes of him being stuck in the Oedipus complex. This led to unconscious sexual desires for his mother and fear of castration from his father, which Freud then said displaced onto his fear of horses, as he was particularly afraid of horses that resembled his father, with black bits around the mouth and blinkers, which represented the father's glasses and moustache. So that's your evidence, okay? So one assumption, how Freud's study links, and some evidence. Now, because the one in your booklet is a 5-mark question, it means you need to have 2 assumptions and 2 links from Freud with evidence, okay? So if you could copy this, first of all, into your booklet, into this area, I'll show you, into this area, please. But you can see it's a 5 marker, which means we need 2 links. So pause, copy this, and then we'll do the second link together. So the second link would be another assumption of the psychodynamic perspective is, now let's see which assumption we can use. I'm going to say we use the assumption that all behavior derives from us going through the psychosexual stages of development. Now don't worry if these are a little bit similar. Freud's study links to this as his participant Little Hans was experiencing the phallic stage and the Oedipus complex within this stage. And then you have to give me some evidence to back that up. For example, Little Hans was studied between the ages of 3 to 5, which is when boys go through the Oedipus complex and are in the phallic stage of psychosexual development. Okay, so my evidence that he's actually experiencing the phallic stage was his age. Okay, but another bit of evidence you could put is Hans was experiencing the Oedipus complex as he had an unconscious fear of castration from his father, which he displaced onto horses that resembled him. So I know it's a little bit long-winded. It doesn't even fit on the slide. Let me put that writing a little bit smaller. There we go. But that would be your second assumption, okay? So again, you can pause it and you can write that down, and then we'll go through the strengths and the weaknesses. So the strengths and weaknesses then we've got. The strength of the psychodynamic perspective is that it is more holistic than others, as it considers how the unconscious interacts with childhood experiences. For example, childhood experience, childhood, what am I saying? Children experience the psychosexual stages unconsciously, but they can actually become fixated based on the trauma that they've suffered during childhood. Okay, so he's looking at the interaction between the unconscious, but also what happens in real life. So he's a little bit more holistic than others, because he's not just saying it's your unconscious mind. He's saying it's your childhood experience as well that will affect your unconscious mind. So it's a little bit more holistic. And then we've got, for example, Freud said that little Hans was experiencing the Oedipus complex. He did resolve it, but if he didn't, if he had some sort of trauma during that time, he would have been fixated. So you can pause this and pop that into your booklets. Another strength is that it is useful. This is because treatments and tests have been developed from research into the psychodynamic area. For example, psychoanalysis stemmed from Freud's research into little Hans, and talking therapies actually came out of little Hans' research as well. Freud used a specific type, a smaller type, of talking therapy by gathering a lot of information about little Hans by getting his father to talk to him about his experiences. So again, you can pause it and you can write this down. Our weaknesses include that the approach tends to use case studies that are non-scientific, and therefore the weakness is that it lacks generalizability. By studying an individual's unconscious mind in depth, the explanation for behaviour can only apply to that individual rather than to everyone else with a similar disorder. For example, in Freud's study, Hans's phobia of horses was him unconsciously transferring a fear of his father onto horses. This wouldn't explain why other children may fear horses. Can you imagine if it was a girl? We wouldn't say that a girl's going through the Oedipus conflict because they don't. So how would we use this study to explain why a girl may have a phobia of horses? Again, pause and please write this down in your booklets. And then the last one is the psychodynamic weakness. Again, we've got that Freud's theory regarding the unconscious are unfalsifiable. This basically means they can't be proven right or wrong. For example, for psychological theories to be classed as scientific, they need to be falsifiable. We can't do this with the unconscious mind. So the psychodynamic approach isn't falsifiable. Why? Because they're saying that everything's down to the unconscious. How can we even prove that's right or wrong? And then the example we can give is Freud's study again. So Freud explained that Hans's phobia was down to him unconsciously experiencing the Oedipus conflict. How can we prove that right? We can't. But we can't actually prove him wrong either. So for those of you that say Freud is, a load of crap, blah, 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 you can't actually prove him wrong because there's no way of finding out if there is an unconscious or not. So again, you need to be pausing this video and writing that down in your booklets. But this should take probably about an hour or so for you to do all of the activities, for you to read through the psychodynamic perspective section, for you to do that link to Freud's study, the table, and to do the strengths and weaknesses table as well. But we will be doing the next and last perspective, and then we will have gone through all 5 approaches and the 2 perspectives as well. The next perspective is a little bit more difficult because it's something you've never looked at, and it's actually called the behaviourist perspective. But once you've done this, you can leave Google Meet and you can get ready for your next session.